Hi, welcome to our channel of IGNOU audiobooks, Indira Gandhi National Open University, School of Gender and Development Studies, SOGDS, Certificate Program in Gender and Science, CGSCI, BGS 004 Gendered Perspectives on Health, Block-1 Gender Bias, Unit-1 Bias in Medical Research and Education, 1.0 Introduction. Let me begin this unit by describing a small incident happened recently when I took my father to see a dentist. The dentist was a woman, and when the treatment started, my father felt uncomfortable and asked me to request the dentist's husband, who is also a dentist, to carry on the minor dental surgery. When I asked the reason, he confided in my mother tongue that can a woman perform surgery and can we depend on her? I want to emphasize here that my father is a modern educated person and often updated his knowledge about many contemporary things and events in the world. But the cause of his stereotypical view about women represents a general stereotype which most of us held. We think that the hard science is for men only and medical procedure like surgery is a natural domain of men. In this unit you will be introduced to the culture, content and practice of medical science from a gender perspective. More precisely, you will be exposed to a domain of medicine which has been traditionally suffering from gender bias since the very beginning of modern medicine. We have barely heard of any names of women pioneers in medical research and education. The contemporary picture is grim too. A 2019 Lancet study claims that women are disadvantaged in science, medicine, and global health due to persisting gender bias in many forms. Many dimensions such as laboratory work, clinical research, publishing, and academic leadership are discussed in this unit to present a broad idea about various sources of gender bias. The content, culture, and pedagogy of medical education have also been discussed to examine issues such as objectification of body, sex education, contraceptive research, etc. 1.1 Learning outcomes. After studying this unit, you would be able to know the sources of gender bias in medical research and education, explain the factors responsible for gender bias in various components of medical research such as clinical trials and contraceptive research, analyze objectification as a major factor in creating gender bias in medicine, and identify cases and explain the sources of gender bias in medical education. 1.2 Gender bias in medical research. Medical research and higher education are dominantly a male domain. Due to various gendered assumptions about knowledge acquisition and social practices, women found it relatively inconvenient to pursue a career in medical research and higher education. Today, most medical scientists and practitioners that students learn about during their training are males. Research or knowledge production is generally seen as a value-neutral domain, but contrary to our belief, the history of modern science is marked with very deep-rooted gender bias. Gender bias can be understood as prejudiced action or thoughts based on the gender-based perception that women are not equal to men in rights and dignity. 1. The representation of women in research is very discouraging. As UNESCO 2019 report says that around 30% of all researchers in the world are women. More and more women are seen enrolled at graduate level in universities, but a small fraction of them join research at PhD level. Making research a full-time career is possible for just a meager 30% too. The bias against women is not just a matter of number, but there are certain systemic biases against participation of women in various components of scientific research. There is systemic bias against women in the medical research too. The foremost issue which often comes to our mind is that medical research is based on a body which is predominantly male. Most research in laboratory as well as clinical trials is conducted with male bodies, either human beings or animals. 1.2.1 Bias in clinical trials. Today, most clinical trials are being conducted on male bodies. Female body is considered only in the field of female reproductive research. There is a general perception that except reproductive functions, most other physiological functions are similar among men and women. Many studies, Rosser 1994, Bird and Raker 1999, have challenged this assumption and have argued that clinical research conducted on male bodies may not be suitable for application to female bodies. The oversimplified notion of human body not only ignores many crucial nuances of women's body but also fails to reveal the degree of similarity between men and women with respect to health and illness. This misplaced notion of body leads to the fact that today, very less number of women participate in clinical trials. To conduct clinical trials in an easier way, to minimize expenditure, and to bypass the complexities associated with menstruation, the funding agencies, research and development organizations, and the scientific community often base their research on the above notion of body. Thus, very poor participation of women in clinical trials is common in medical research today. Exclusion of women from clinical studies has severe repercussions, such as exposing them to ineffective drugs with unknown side effects. The very process of recruiting women into clinical trials faces procedural, social, and physiological challenges. Researchers and pharmaceutical companies often take an easier way by bypassing women due to the complexities linked to menstruation and try to oversimplify the entire process of medical research. This gender bias in recruiting participants, Soderstrom, 2001, in clinical trials is a major problem in assessing the efficacy of drugs today. Women may differ in efficacy and side effects of drugs trials, but exclusion or low participation of women in clinical trials lead to inadequate assessment of safety and efficacy of drugs. The above gender bias is rooted in perceived similarities between men and women in physiology and disease experience. However, there are gender biases due to perceived differences between men and women which are not real. The most obvious example is the medical research based on perceived difference due to objectification of women as bodies or objects for satisfaction of sexual desire. A significant amount of research today is meant to enhance women's body as an object, thereby strengthening the gender bias already existing in the domain of medical research. 1.2 Objectifying through surgery. Medical science considers human beings as bodies, largely denying the subjective feelings and experiences. This is how subjectivity is minimized and rendered irrelevant in our striving for scientific and objective research. Objectification of women feeds as well as is fed by this conception of human beings in medical research. Objectification normalizes human body, Foucault, 1978, and converts it into a machine. The motivation for objectivity through objectification is intricately linked to gender bias in medical research. To look at the world objectively is to objectify it. IGNOU, 1987. Denying subjective feelings and experiences feed into already existing gender bias in our society by strengthening the practice of identifying women with their bodies. Women in our society are identified and associated with their bodies and looks more than our men. Bartke, 1990, Bordeaux, 1993. Objectification serves to highlight the difference in sex features of male and female body. Termed as self-objectification by many scholars, this is based on the various ways in which human beings achieve a sense about themselves as sexual beings, overpowering the identity as human being. They see themselves as sexual subjects and as sexual objects by others. This thrust towards objectification strengthens gender bias. Objectification occurs when a woman's body parts, or sexual functions are isolated from her whole and complex being and treated as objects simply to be looked at, coveted, or touched. Fredrickson and Roberts, 1997. Objectification of body tends to encourage those types of research which helps in presenting woman's body as something to be consumed or used. Research on skin color enhancement, nose repair, breast enhancement, labia repair, etc. exemplifies such research, which both represents as well as encourages gender bias in medical research. Medical science has responded well to the pressure women feel to correct and enhance their bodies as well as appearance. Objectification by others as well as self-objectification propels medical research towards new innovative research and products. The pressure to succumb to the ideal feminine body leads towards research aiming to keep women's body of a certain size and shape. This tyranny of slenderness, Bartke, 1990, has led to large amount of funding in the medical research surrounding slimming techniques, dieting, exercises, and cosmetics. Plastic surgery involving rhinoplasty, liposuction, breast enhancement, etc. is a major thrust in medical research today. A study on aesthetics plastic surgery conducted in the US reveals that there has been over 15.5 million cosmetic procedures performed in 2016, representing a 124% increase since the year 2000, asks 2016. Another study conducted in 2019 by International Society for Aesthetics Plastic Surgery reveals that the top 5 surgical procedures performed worldwide are breast augmentation, liposuction, eyelid surgery, abdominoplasty, and rhinoplasty. A whopping 86.5% of all surgical procedures were performed on women. ISAPS 2019. 1.2.3 Contraceptive research. Another very prominent domain of medical research which reflects as well as strengthens gender bias is contraceptive research. A mere glance at the reports published at the international level on contraceptive research can throw ample light on the deep-seated gender bias in the issue of contraception in our society. The whole issue of contraception is considered as women's responsibility as reflected from the sentences used in many such reports. Box 1.1, Trends in Contraceptive Use Worldwide 2015, UN report. In 2015, 19% of married or in-union women relied on female sterilization and 14% used the IUD. Short-term methods are less common. 9% of women used the pill in 2015, 8% relied on male condoms, and 5% used injectables. Only 6% of married or in-union women worldwide used rhythm or withdrawal. Nowhere in the above sentence can we find men's role used by, men or men's responsibility, etc. This is just one representative sentence. Sentences and phrases like this indicate the inherent gender bias in the research establishment worldwide. Responsibilities and risks associated with sex have been largely borne by women in most human societies. Since the beginning of research and development on contraceptives, most products and procedures are directed towards women. Contraceptive methods like oral hormonal pills, intrauterine devices, IUD, sterilization, injectables, have received more funding than male-dependent contraceptives. A 2019 UN study reveals that female sterilization is the most common contraceptive used worldwide. An estimated 24% of all contraceptive users go for female sterilization method, 17% depend on intrauterine devices, 16% use oral hormonal pills, and 8% go for injectable contraceptives. All of these are female-dependent contraceptives. At the same time, the male-dependent contraceptive methods such as male sterilization method account for only 2%, male condom uses is 21%, withdrawal 5%, and rhythm account for only 3% of all contraceptive users, UN 2019. This gives a clear picture of the existing gender bias in use of contraceptives. The above statistics also indicates biasness at a deeper level. Most of the research and development on contraceptives focus on female-dependent Methods in spite of evidences in support of feasibility of developing various male contraceptives. Male oral pills have been developed a decade after the female pill was developed. But it has not been taken up by pharmaceutical companies due to factors ranging from side effects to socio-cultural factors. There are side effects such as mood swing, lower sex drive, and weight gain in female pill users, but the similar side effects are considered risky for the healthy and active young men. The funding organizations and pharmaceutical industries lack interest in encouraging male contraceptive research for several reasons. The foremost factor is lack of funding. The male contraceptive research is least funded and there is a gender bias in funding. There is a perception that the pharmaceutical companies may lose the already built consumer base of female contraceptives if they engage in promoting male contraceptives. Roth et al. 2015. Moreover, there is gender bias in contraceptive research on assessment of the side effects by both genders. During the clinical trials of oral hormonal pills, the side effects reported by young men are taken seriously, and most often the male contraceptive research and development are stalled on the basis of these reported side effects. However, the similar side effects reported by women in the clinical trials of female contraceptive pills are sidelined and are underestimated. Kummain and Outshun. 2002. Thus, the voice of the participants is differentially responded according to their gender, whereas the perspectives of male contraceptive users have been emphasized and negotiated by authoritative spokespersons within the medical establishment. The incorporation of the interests and needs of female contraceptive users depended on women's health advocates. IBID. There are many reported cases where successful trials for male contraceptives have been abruptly stalled or closed. The side effects experienced by men in the clinical trials have been cited as the reason. 1.3 Bias in medical education. There has been strong gender bias in the domain of medical education too. Though there is a growing trend of enrollment of female students in medical schools and colleges worldwide, the incidences of gender discrimination and harassment is at higher rate than faced by female students enrolled in non-medical degrees. Brown, 2020 et al., Witte et al., 2006. Moreover, there is discouraging underrepresentation of women in faculty and leadership positions in medical colleges. More than the issue of numerical representation, it is in the pedagogy of medical education that reflects, as well as covertly encourages patriarchal mindset. The most obvious source of gender bias in medical education is the normalization of male body as human body. Medical textbooks are still based on the male body as the norm and female as the exception. Teaching and clinical examinations still consider male body as the norm, as is evident from the classroom and practical training given to medical students. In the training, the students are taught how to conduct clinical examination on the entire body, head, neck, abdomen, limbs, etc., except breast and pelvis. The ignoring of these parts conforms to the male body norm in medical education. Textbook and curricula analysis reveals other sources of gender stereotypes. 2. Alexanderson et al., 1998. Even the language used in medical education and the related environment has a strong role in upholding masculine attitude, and there is a need to examine this covert practice of gender bias. Bleakley, 2013. Use of terminology in medical textbooks and teaching often reveals the underlying gender stereotypes. Choice of terms to depict similar medical conditions in men and women reflect the general biased attitude towards women in our society. The following paragraph is an example of discriminatory naming which reflects, as well as contributes to gender biasness. A possible cause of infertility in both men and women is the presence of antibodies. However, the terms that have been selected by experts to describe this condition in men and women differ tremendously. In some men, the immune system effectively destroys the sperm as soon as they are produced. This condition is typically described using terms such as autoimmunity or sperm antibodies. It is also possible for a woman to develop antibodies against her partner's sperm in her cervical mucus. However, the term chosen to describe this condition makes no mention of antibodies or of the immune system. Rather, the woman's cervical mucus is described as being hostile. Boker, 2001. Gender is an essential determinant of health and illness. Women experience disease differently due to their social, economic, and political status in the family as well as the society. However, the significance of gender is hardly recognized in the medical curricula. Medical education depends upon biomedical conception of human being. The reductionist conception of diseases and treatment limit medical knowledge only to human biology. Hoffman, 2000. The possible linkages of biology with social, economic, and political factors are ignored in medical education. The biologically determined category of male and female determines the entire discourse of medical education, thereby ignoring gender as such. Krieger and Fee, 1994. This has very detrimental effect on women's health in general. Patriarchy percolates into medical education when we categorize medical knowledge into various branches in a stereotypical way. Women's health means reproductive health is a stereotypical description. Likewise, the branch of reproductive health need not include only female reproductive concerns. This kind of stereotypical categorization strengthens the tendency to identify womanhood with motherhood. Limiting women's health to the domain of reproduction and pregnancy strengthens the social construction of women as mothers and wives. Davis, 1988, Nicolette and Jacobs, 2000, Searle, 1998. Another crucial source of gender bias in medical education is the limited coverage or overemphasis on certain disorders under certain branches of medicine. For example, overemphasis of female reproductive concerns in the branch of reproductive health ignores certain relevant male reproductive issues. This leads to a dangerous gap in evidence-based knowledge on men's reproductive health problems. For instance, there is lacking knowledge of psychosocial aspects of prostate cancer. Contrary to the research of breast cancer and female gender identity, there is little research into the effect of prostate cancer on male gender identity. Verdonk et al., 2009. 1.4 Sex education. Sex education is required for proper growth and development of individuals. All cultures have some way or other to provide sex education to their children. Most societies have either the family or the peer groups who manages to deliver sex education. Tribal societies have institutionalized age groups which shoulder this responsibility. However, these forms of traditional sex education seem inadequate and incomplete in many aspects. The ongoing fast technosocial changes, which necessitate rethinking of the mores, norms and values attached to sexual behavior, have to be incorporated in sex education today. Sex education refers to an age-appropriate, culturally relevant approach to teaching about sex and relationships by providing scientifically accurate, realistic, non-judgmental information. UNESCO, 2009. Thus, it is not limited to teaching of only the sex physiology and family planning procedures, but it is a holistic orientation to a healthy and fulfilling relationship. Changing gender roles warrants corresponding changes in fulfilling the risk and responsibilities associated with sex and reproduction. Thus, gender needs to be a crucial component in sex education. Formal sex education is nearly absent in most countries today. Talking about sex is a taboo in most Asian countries. The available sex education programs rarely adhere to the gender aspect of sexual behavior and relationships. Most often, the pedagogy of sex education consciously or unconsciously encourages the stereotypical gender roles that discriminate against female youth. Sex educators attempt to avoid using gender terms while educating, but many of them operate in paternalistic framework dominant in our society. Meyerson, 1986. Moreover, the educators often expect the female students not to be overt in asking questions or doubts related to sex and sexuality. Even today, the sex educators expect that the girl students will be more responsible in safeguarding the morality than the boys. Even the text and material used in sex education are far from gender sensitive. For example, the way menstruation is taught creates a sense of embarrassment and disgust among both male and female students. 1.5 Summary: Gender bias is persistent in medical research and education. Gender is an essential determinant in human health and illness, but, unfortunately, it is ignored in medicine. There are various sources of gender bias in medical research and education. The most striking of these is the lack of recognition of gender in the biomedical discourses, which is often called as gender blindness. The other sources of gender bias happen when the difference between the sexes is overemphasized where there is none. The third category of gender bias happens when the difference between the sexes is overlooked in disease prognosis, treatment, and experience of illness. These sources have been discussed by examining various issues such as clinical trials, objectification, and contraceptive research. Moreover, the important issues in medical education have been discussed in this unit to highlight sources of gender bias in medical curricula. Clinical training and sex education. The underrepresentation of women in academic leadership is highlighted to reveal the underlying sources of gender bias in medicine. Thank you. Subscribe to our channel for more updates, and we will see you with the next chapter.